They never stood under stage lights. They never toured arenas or posed for magazine covers. For years, most listeners had no idea what they looked like. Yet the opening bars of Time, that slow, devastating piano descent, were enough to stop a room cold. A generation of Americans grew up with these melodies woven into the soundtrack of their lives. First loves, slow dances, and late-night radio drifting through an open car window. The music was everywhere. The men behind it were nowhere. That is the story of two visionaries who rejected every convention of the music industry and, in doing so, built something that outlasted nearly all of them. To understand the Alan Parsons Project, you must first understand the two men who conceived it, neither of whom was an ordinary musician. Alan Parsons was, above all, a craftsman of sound. His credentials were not merely impressive, they were historic. He entered the music industry through the hallowed halls of Abbey Road studios, where he served as assistant engineer and tape operator during the Beatles' final sessions, witnessing from the inside the creation of some of pop history's most consequential recordings. From that apprenticeship, he became the full engineer on The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd's 1973 masterpiece, widely regarded as one of the most technically and artistically perfect albums ever recorded. Parsons did not simply record music, he sculpted it. Eric Woolfson was his counterpart in every sense. A Scottish composer and pianist born in Glasgow, Woolfson's imagination gravitated not to the recording desk, but to grand narrative, theatrical arcs, conceptual storytelling, and the architecture of ideas. While Parsons commanded the technical machinery of sound, Woolfson supplied the intellectual and dramatic vision that gave that sound its soul. The two men crossed paths in 1974 in the corridors of Abbey Road. Their chemistry was immediate and complementary. Woolfson arrived with fully formed compositions and conceptual frameworks, while Parsons possessed the technical mastery to render those concepts in their most fully realized form. Together, they created something without precedent in popular music, the Alan Parsons Project. The operating principle was radical for its time. There would be no permanent band, no fixed lineup, and no exhausting world tours. Parsons and Woolfson conceived of the project not as a conventional rock group, but as a film production. Parsons was the director and Woolfson was the screenwriter. For each composition, they would cast the precise vocalist or instrumentalist for that role, treating musicians as actors chosen for a specific dramatic purpose. Within this philosophy of selective casting, they enlisted one of the project's most consequential, yet often underappreciated collaborators, David Payton. Payton was no ordinary session player. Before joining the project, where he contributed as both a bassist and a vocalist on several of the project's most celebrated tracks, he had already demonstrated rare range. He was the voice and creative force behind Pilot, the band behind the international hit Magic. Beyond that, his resume read like a who's who of British rock royalty. He performed alongside the progressive rock ensemble Camel, worked with Kate Bush, collaborated with keyboard virtuoso Rick Wakeman, and served as bassist for none other than Elton John. The presence of a musician of Payton's caliber in the project's rotating ensemble signaled the standard Parsons and Woolfson demanded and consistently achieved. Tell me something. Do you have a memory tied to one of these songs? A person, a place, or a moment you can't quite shake? Share it in the comments. You might be surprised by how many strangers share the same one. What they were about to build wasn't just music. It was a time machine. It began with a single audacious idea. The debut album, released in 1976, announced their ambitions without apology. Tales of mystery and imagination, drew entirely from Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic literary universe, weaving orchestral grandeur, progressive rock architecture, and a persistent atmosphere of shadow and unease. The music world took notice.
And the night goes on forever, then you might change like the weather.
The following year brought I, Robot, a conceptual exploration inspired by Isaac Asimov's science fiction universe. Themes of artificial intelligence, human obsolescence, and the philosophical boundaries between machines and consciousness articulated through sound at a time when such ideas were still firmly in the realm of speculation. The project was thinking decades ahead. The commercial apex began to take shape with The Turn of a Friendly Card, released in November 1980, a conceptual record centered on gambling and human ambition that produced the hit games people play, and confirmed the duo's ability to translate abstract ideas into music that resonated far beyond intellectual circles.
Where do we go from here, now that all of the children are grown?
The same album contained what would become perhaps the most emotionally enduring composition in the entire project catalog: Time. With Eric Woolfson's rare and deeply felt vocal performance, he seldom sang, but when he did, the effect was singular. Time stands as one of the most devastating meditations on loss and impermanence in the popular song canon. It does not simply describe grief, it inhabits it. Even today, the opening piano phrase arrives like a hand gently placed on a shoulder, an acknowledgement of all that passes and cannot be recovered. But just as the world was falling in love with their sound, something happened that threatened to render them invisible. And it came from a direction no one saw coming. Then came 1982 and Eye in the Sky. The title track became the project's definitive signature. Its hypnotic pulse and immaculate production dominated American radio throughout that year. It was a record that announced itself with absolute confidence and delivered on every front. The album also contained Sirius, a brief, propulsive instrumental never intended as a sports anthem. Originally conceived as an atmospheric lead-in to the title track, its slow build and dramatic synthesizer line made it irresistible for player entrances. In 1984, Tommy Edwards, the Chicago Bulls' public address announcer, first deployed it before their home games, the very year Michael Jordan arrived as a rookie. As the story goes, Edwards heard Sirius playing as ambient music in a Chicago movie theater one evening, recognized it immediately, and knew it was the sound he had been searching for. The track rose to cultural dominance alongside Jordan's dynasty throughout the 1990s, becoming inextricably linked to one of the greatest runs in American sports history. A composition born in a recording studio at Abbey Road had become the auditory signal for greatness itself. 4 decades later, its reach extended even further. FIFA officially designated Sirius as the walkout anthem for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, ensuring it would be heard before every match as teams entered the field at stadiums across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The track now plays at the precise moment the atmosphere shifts from pre-match noise to a national ceremony. That charged silence before anthems, flags, and everything. A song recorded in 1982 by 2 men who never sought the spotlight now fills the largest sporting stage on earth. The same piece of music that had soundtracked a basketball dynasty was now accompanying the entrance of nations. Only then did the stadiums belong to the entire world. Success, however, arrived at the wrong cultural moment. The early 1980s ushered in the MTV era, a seismic reconfiguration of the music industry, in which visual identity became as commercially decisive as the music itself. Bands were expected to perform, project personality, and inhabit a visual mythology. The Alan Parsons Project, a faceless studio entity with no fixed roster and no appetite for live performance, was structurally incompatible with this new landscape. Albums such as Ammonia Avenue, 1984, and Vulture Culture, 1985, were accomplished, polished, and intelligent works. But they began to seem, in the eyes of critics and an increasingly image-obsessed industry, like artifacts of an earlier sensibility. Their conceptual rigor, a liability in an environment that rewarded spectacle. The industry was changing, and somewhere within the partnership that had built all of this, something else was beginning to fracture, quietly, irreversibly, and with consequences no one had anticipated. Internal tensions compounded external pressures. By the late 1980s, a fundamental divide had emerged between the two principles. Woolfson's deepest creative ambition had always been to musical theater, adapting their conceptual album narratives into stage productions for Broadway and London's West End. Parsons remained committed to the recording studio as the ultimate creative arena. The two men wanted different things, and the distance between their desires had become irreconcilable. Gaudi, released in January 1987 and inspired by the architectural visions of the Catalan master Antoni Gaudí, served as the final statement of the classic collaboration under the Alan Parsons Project name. It was a worthy conclusion, ambitious, meticulous, unmistakably theirs, yet still a conclusion. What followed sealed the break permanently. The recording, conceived as the 11th Alan Parsons Project album, gradually transformed in the hands of its two creators into something neither had fully anticipated. Produced by Parsons himself, Freudiana, a sweeping musical examination of the life and theories of Sigmund Freud, was the project during which the creative differences between the two men became irreconcilable. It was not the aftermath of their separation. It was its cause. Released in 1990 and credited outside the project name, it premiered as a stage musical in Vienna that same year. And with that, the partnership that had defined both their careers came to a quiet, definitive close. Woolfson pursued the theatrical ambitions that had always defined his deepest creative impulse, developing successful musical productions across Europe, revisiting, in stage form, many of the thematic territories he and Parsons had first charted on record. Parsons, meanwhile, undertook something that would have seemed impossible under the project's original conception. He went on the road. Under the name the Alan Parsons Live Project, he assembled touring ensembles and brought the music, those layered, studio-constructed compositions, to live audiences for the first time. Entire generations of American fans who had grown up with the records but had never seen a live performance finally had the opportunity to do so. He also continued to record and remained a revered authority in high-fidelity audio engineering, shaping generations of producers and sound designers. And here is the question that stays with me. If Woolfson had lived, do you think they would have reconciled? Do you think there was one more Alan Parsons Project album left in them? I genuinely want to know what you believe. What happened next was not an ending. It was far more complex. A legacy that refused to stay silent and a final recognition that arrived exactly when it was needed. In 2009, Eric Woolfson died at 64 after a prolonged battle with cancer. The reunion many had imagined would one day happen never came to pass. His contribution to both recorded music and the theatrical arts remains, by any honest accounting, immeasurable. The legacy he left behind, however, proved more enduring than even the most devoted fan might have anticipated. In 2019, Alan Parsons received a Grammy Award for Best Immersive Audio Album, honoring the 35th anniversary edition of Eye in the Sky, a formal acknowledgement from the industry's highest institution that the technical and artistic standards of that work had not only survived the decades, but continued to define them. On streaming platforms today, their catalog, From the Gothic grandeur of tales of mystery and imagination to the radio precision of Eye in the Sky, finds new listeners daily, sounding as crystalline, as considered, and as emotionally present as on the day each record was completed at Abbey Road. Some stories don't end. They simply shift frequency. The Alan Parsons Project never chased the spotlight, yet the spotlight found them anyway 40 years later in the world's largest stadiums, in the silence before nations take the field, in the opening notes of a song two men recorded in a room most people will never see. That is not luck. That is the particular permanence that comes only when craft is treated as a sacred obligation. Eric Woolfson is gone, but time still plays. And somewhere tonight, someone is hearing it for the first time, feeling something they don't yet have words for. That's the thing about cathedrals. You don't have to know who built them to feel what they were built for. These stories live in the spaces between what the music industry remembers and what it forgets. We exist to bridge that gap. If this story moved you, if it took you back to a memory, a person, or a version of yourself you'd almost forgotten, you already know why it deserves to be shared. Send it to someone who needs to remember. Send it to someone who has never heard the name Alan Parsons. Either way, the music will do the rest. And if you believe the architects of sound deserve the same reverence as the stars who stood in front of them, subscribe because there are more stories like this, hidden in plain sight, playing on a loop in the back of your mind. We'll be here, preserving the echoes. Until next time.